Welcome to BIPACT News on the Jewish TV channel. I'm Naya, Lekht, education analyst, and we have an amazing guest with us today, a true warrior, a friend to the Jewish people and the land of Israel, a truth seeker, an inspiration to so many across the world. And I really personally feel so privileged and honored to be able to speak with Colonel Richard Kemp. Now, I want to properly introduce Colonel Kemp to you all, and he has a very robust biography, but I'm just going to, I picked a few important highlights. So Colonel Richard Kemp has spent most of his life combating terrorism and insurgency in Iraq, the Balkans, and Northern Ireland, where he was wounded in a terrorist attack. He was the commander of the British forces in Afghanistan in 2003. His name appeared on the Al-Qaeda kill list in 2013, and I think he finds that quite an honor to be on the hit list of Al-Qaeda. As well as leading at the sharp end of conflict, he has been involved in the direction of national policy at really the highest level in the British Prime Minister's office, heading international terrorism intelligence teams. But in addition to his record, military combat and advising on terrorism, he has also taken a passionate interest in advocating for the Jewish people, which we're going to dive into today to understand why did Colonel Kemp decide to become this really important, prominent speaker for the Jewish advocate world. Now, having been present during recent military operations in Gaza and in Judea, Samaria, he has defended the state of Israel and its armed forces at the United Nations at several national legislation levels, including the US Congress, the UK Parliament, and international media. He is a founding board member of Friends of Israel Initiative, a senior associate fellow of the Royal United Services Institute for Defense and Security, a fellow of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, and a distinguished senior fellow at the Gainstone Institute, which I think you've written some amazing, important articles highlighting and really exposing Soviet influence in the PLO. I've read some of your work and I find it to be very important. So I welcome others to read your work as well from the Gainstone Institute. I could say so much more. You have your own Wikipedia page, but I want to just get into it. I want to frame this conversation. I want to be very honest and transparent in the sense that we will be speaking about some thorny topics, maybe spicy ones. Now, I have been in the space of Jewish education and activism for a few years, but as a Jew, and you bring to this conversation and this perspective a very unique voice, a very unique window lens, being non-Jewish and so today I want to talk to you about what is it that you see in terms of how are we Jewish people combating anti-Semitism? What are we doing right? What are we not doing right? So this is what I want to get into. So my first question to you is, why did you even become interested in advocating for the Jewish people in Israel? Why?
Before I answer that question, I'd like to say what a pleasure it is to join you and your viewers today. And I'm a great admirer of your incredible work that you do. You and I have done various things together over the past, mainly involving the education of teenagers in the United States, and I think what you do is absolutely incredible. So keep that up. It's fantastic work. The answer to your question is that when I was a child, I was taught right from wrong, and when I saw what was happening and understood what was happening in relation to Israel on the world stage, the way that Israel was being vilified, condemned, and really unjustly criminalized in various different forums, in the media, in universities, in the United Nations, in various governments. Knowing right from wrong, and knowing from personal experience of 30 years about the type of conflict Israel's been fighting, given that most of the criticism, or much of the criticism against Israel, is to do with military operations, I felt I had no choice other than to stand up and give the real perspective, give an objective view on it from an experienced individual who, not only have I taken part in the different campaigns you mentioned, but also I've been extremely familiar over many years with Israel's way of operating. And so I was left really with no choice apart from to do that. And one thing that I think motivates me as well is that Israel and Great Britain are close friends and allies. We get a lot from our relationship with Israel. If you put aside even the incredible trade relationship we have and the cultural relationship we have, from my perspective, the intelligence relationship, the security relationship is so important. Both of us gain from it, both Britain and Israel gain from it. I think we're the net beneficiaries, and many British lives have been saved by, for example, Israeli intelligence, Israeli counter-bomb technology, Israeli battlefield medical technology. And I visited a young man in hospital, a young British soldier, 18 years of age, a number of years ago now, who'd been blown up in Afghanistan a few days before he was in hospital in the UK, having himself repaired. He'd lost at least 1, 2 limbs and an eye, I think. And he knew, that young man knew, that he owed his life to Israeli battlefield medical technology, because he'd been administered a clotting agent on the battlefield, the best anywhere in the world, provided by Israel, that stopped him from bleeding to death. And that's just one of many, many other examples I could give you as to the importance of Israel to the UK, and why I think it's extremely important that any right-thinking person stands up and rejects the lies spoken about Israel.
Listening to you, I have to say, the first thing that you said, you grew up knowing right from wrong. And that's such a, it's a very simple thing that you say. And indeed, I've worked with many American Jewish teens, and I would say that it's not even that the education is lacking, it's the more moral compass. And I think that is the biggest battle, really, on the battlefield of ideas and a battlefield of morality is not necessarily, educating. Yes, that's very important. But the fact that you were able, because you were taught right from wrong, and that's such a simple idea, but so needed in our civilization today. It's really, but so let me ask you this question. What year was it the first time that you visited Israel?
It's going back a long time.
Let me qualify this. When was the first time you visited as a military advisor? It's somebody who would advise militarily.
I went there. I went on holiday a couple of times, actually, many years ago. But the first time I went on duty when I was working for the British Cabinet Office, the Prime Minister's Office on international terrorism. And I went over there. It was must have been about 2003 or thereabouts, working and having meetings and talks with Mossad over joint intelligence concerns between our two countries. We held talks frequently, either in Israel or in the UK or wherever. And that was the first. So it was, I can't remember exactly, but it was around about.
What was the first thing? We have the idea, and then you come and see it. What was it that when you first saw it? What's something that shocked you pleasantly or unpleasantly? What was something that you thought, and then you had to kind of recalibrate a bit, perhaps?
I don't think when I went there the first time, I don't think I had any illusions. I didn't go with any illusions about Israel. I expected a great deal from Israel. I'd studied particularly Israeli military operations from when I was 18 years, before I was 18, actually, when I was still at school. In the British Army, we studied Israeli operations because we wanted to learn from them, and we did learn from them. And later, that was conventional warfare. Later, we learned from their terrorism techniques and practices. So I knew a great deal about it, and nothing came to me as a surprise. I think it was, I obviously hadn't experienced Israeli society before I went there, but I found it to be extremely appealing and extremely attractive in every way. The weather was fantastic for a start. Beaches were great in Tel Aviv. Some of the sites I saw in Jerusalem, and amazingly, the first time I ever visited the holy sites in Jerusalem, I was taken around by a Jewish Mossad guide to the Christian sites in Jerusalem, which was quite a bizarre thing. But no, it met my complete expectations. I went with my daughter, both my daughters actually, a few years later, and they were absolutely blown away by the place. They'd obviously heard all the propaganda against Israel. They also knew what I had to say about it, and I hope they accepted what I said. But they'd heard all the propaganda. But they went there. I think they went there thinking they were going to be in some sort of shanty town in the middle of Africa, and it was just all camels and donkeys and things like that. They found this really, very for young girls as they were at the time, they still are fairly young, sort of glitzy, attractive, cosmopolitan city of Tel Aviv, and then the real contrast in Jerusalem with the historical sites. And we toured a lot of rural areas in the country as well, up in the Galilee and down in the Negev, etc. And yeah, they found it absolutely incredible. So I go there frequently. I'm there several times each year.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever I arrive, I don't want to leave, even if I'm just going there to work, to do innumerable meetings. I still don't want to leave the place because it's such a fantastic country with such brilliant people.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's take a little bit of a more serious turn here. All your years in combat, you've seen some very difficult things, I'm sure. You also understand military strategy. Now, I believe that the Jewish people are fighting on two fronts. One front is in Israel, is existential. It's on their skin, as they say. And the other front is the Jewish diaspora fighting a narrative war. So here's the two questions. Can we apply certain strategies from the battlefield, from physical warfare into narrative warfare? And if so, what would those be?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I'd say about all that, you're absolutely right. It's a two-front war. In fact, multiple fronts, but in broad terms, it's two fronts. And Israel is very, very capable. From my own personal experience, Israel is very, very capable of fighting the war on the battlefield, and that includes, the terrorist war that's going on within Israel itself. So Israel can do that. What Israel desperately needs help with is that other front, the propaganda war, the war of delegitimization, the BDS, etc. And that's where the diaspora is absolutely critical. And I speak frequently to groups from the Jewish diaspora around the world, including frequently in the United States. I'm going there very soon as well. And the work, there's a lot of work goes on. A lot of people are pretty focused on this campaign to defend Israel against the lies. And it's incredibly important that they do so. And I think one thing I would say, there's a couple of things that I could take, as I think you asked me what kind of lessons from the battlefield can be learned by people dealing with this other front. One of them is really an area of your great specialization, which is training. And you never send a soldier into battle unless he's properly trained to fight. That would be, obviously there are emergency situations where that may not be possible, but generally speaking, it would be gross dereliction to do that. So they have to be trained to fight. In the same way, people who are fighting the propaganda, the narrative war, as you call it, they have to be trained to fight as well. And it's a tough form of training because the enemy, as one might call them, in other words, the people who want to delegitimize and do away with Israel, they're given numerous narrative points that they spout out. Very often they don't know the detail. They'll chant slogans, but not know what they're talking about, really. But in order to counter them, those of us who are on the side of right have to know the details. We have to know the facts, because if someone spouts out some line about apartheid Israel or whatever, we've got to know why they're not an apartheid state. Well, of course they're not an apartheid state. We've got to know why that. We've got to know what apartheid is and why Israel is not that. So, and because the situation is constantly changing every day is another crisis affecting Israel. The training involves, it's constant. It's not, you can't just learn something and then get on with it. You've got to constantly keep on top of it. And when we're talking about university students, for example, who are at the forefront of this fight, they're at university trying to learn a degree, trying to study, trying to live a good life as well and have a good time. Yet what we're asking them to do is to get their heads inside this very difficult training issue. But I think it's so important they do that. And without it, then they're basically naked, they're vulnerable, they can't really fight back. And another thing I would say that is needed on the battlefield and also is needed in this narrative war is courage. And you can't train someone to be courageous. Obviously, training that you give them helps them to be courageous, gives them confidence. But I think that kind of innate courage is something that's important. And I think so often we are, students I'm talking about particularly now, they're almost discouraged from being courageous by being told, oh, you've got to be safe, you've got to have a safe space. You can't, if someone says something you disagree with, that's terrible. No, it's not terrible. And you don't need a safe space, and you don't need to be safe. You need to stand up for what is right. You need to have the facts behind you, and you need to not be afraid of the propaganda and the undoubted insults you're going to get thrown at you. Now, I don't say that lightly, because I also know that there's such a big machine against Israel working in US universities, and that exam results and gradings and numerous other factors, your social life can be affected by what you say about Israel. But you've got to, you have to make a decision. Obviously, you've got to be careful about and bright about what you say, and you've got to say it in the right way, so you can't be exploited. But you have to make a decision. Is this important enough, or is it not, for me to take these risks? And risk taking is really another factor, as well as training and courage. Taking risks, being prepared to go out on a limb, and not just following what everyone else is saying. I think that's so important. Easy for me to sit here and say that, not quite as easy for someone who's right in the thick of it on a university campus.
I completely agree with you. And I agree that courage cannot be taught. I completely agree with you. And I think it goes back to when we just started this conversation, and you were taught right from wrong. I think there was a time where courage was a value that civilization, that culture inculcated, that culture valued. Right? As you say, we want safe spaces. Oh, we want brave spaces. I mean, what are you signaling to the youth when you say we need to create safe spaces? That you shouldn't be brave. But something that you've said at different conferences that I've heard you said, you keep saying, keep on attacking. You keep saying, you keep on attacking. I want you to unpack that for our listeners today. What do you mean by that? Do you mean be on the offense? What can you tell us more? Because it really resonates with me personally, and so many youth that listen to you. They are so inspired because nobody tells them that. Nobody tells them. Everyone tells them to be so polite. So what do you mean by that?
Well, what we're talking about here is basically the defense of Israel. We're trying to defend Israel against an unprecedented propaganda campaign, probably the most effective propaganda campaign in the history of the world. Well, I wouldn't even call it propaganda. I call it a slur campaign, which is so powerful. So we're defending against that. But in military terms, the best form of defense is offense, is attack. So you cannot just sit back and wait for people to have a go at you, or to have a go at Israel, something like that. You've got to get on the front foot. You've got to take the initiative, and you've got to explain. And when I say attack, I'm not talking about physically attacking people. Obviously, in this, I certainly wouldn't encourage that in this environment, or any environment that you didn't have to. But you've got to seize the initiative, and you've got to not just say, oh, Israel's great, we produce bits of iPhones, and we produce nice oranges and all that sort of stuff, and nice people. You've got to really also explain the nature of the enemy, who this is that is fighting Israel, because a lot of people don't realize this. And if you go into, for example, into Gaza and into the Judea and Samaria, where a lot of this propaganda originates from among the Palestinian leadership, where they're controlling their people, they're brainwashing their people, they're preventing their people from having proper, decent relations with Israel, which would be hugely beneficial to both sides, particularly beneficial to the Palestinians, yes, who are suffering because of the policy of their leadership. And if you let's say you're a Gaza citizen in Gaza, and you get accused of spying for Israel, say, it's probably not true, probably nothing in it, but they like to make examples of people sometimes to discourage others. So you'll get dragged through the streets behind a motorbike until you're dead. Things like that. The money that's going, the vast amount of money that's going from the West, from the United States, from the UK, from European countries and elsewhere, into the Palestinian pockets. This is not going to build hospitals and schools and any other facilities beneficial to the Palestinians. It is going mostly into one of two things. One is weapons to attack Israel, very often purchased from Iran or supplied by Iran. And that includes rockets. It includes millions and millions of dollars spent on digging attack tunnels from Gaza, etc. And so that's where one part of it goes. The other part of it goes into the pockets of the leadership. The Palestinian terrorist leaders, or the Palestinian leaders, whether it's Hamas, PLO, Fatah, whatever, the Palestinian leaders are some of the most wealthy terrorist leaders in the world, and people need to understand that. So it's taking, in a way, taking the war to them, and not just talking about how great Israel is. We know it's great, and everyone knows it's great, even those who say it isn't. So right. That's what I mean really by attacking, and it's a mindset to not just sit back and accept all the crap that's going on, but to really get on the offensive as much as you possibly can.
And I agree with you. I think that we desperately, as a Jewish, and now I'm speaking just as a Jewish person, I'm from the former Soviet Union. My father, who is from Kiev, and where you recently were yourself, he was averse to my activism. He wanted me to be the quiet Jew, not the activist Jew. And I see this repetition with American Jewry of don't stick your neck out too much, don't make a scene, be polite, be humane, said that, invoking Jewish values. And then the worst is they're afraid to be labeled Islamophobic. Have you ever been labeled that? And what are your thoughts about that?
I'm frequently labeled Islamophobic. And of course, that is a standard way of attacking somebody who seeks to defend Israel. It's absolutely top of the list of slurs that you can throw at people, and it's obviously, it's like any form of racism. It's disgusting, and it can paint someone in a really, really bad light, and does all the time. And to those people I say that say I'm Islamophobic, I will tell them that I have fought for Islamic countries and Islamic people for their freedom and for their lives. I've been awarded medals by 2 Islamic nations for fighting for their people. I've been awarded a British medal for saving the lives of everyone inside a Muslim village in Bosnia when there was a terrible incident that occurred to them. So fine, those people who accuse me of being Islamophobic, please tell me what you've done for the Muslims. What is it you've done? And have you just sat there hurling out abuse and actually attacking Israel in a way that is not just bad for Israel, it's worse for Muslims, it's worse for the Palestinians, because as I mentioned before, Palestinians could have a much, much better life than they have if they were to live side by side in peace and cooperation with Israel, which is something they can do, but their leadership don't want them to, they don't let them. And right. And I think that by fostering this anti-Israel propaganda, you're actually, Israel is going to survive it. Of course, it's negative for Israel, and rockets being fired, and kids spending days in bomb shelters in towns in Sderot and towns and cities around Gaza. That is a terrible thing to happen, and it's damaging, but it's not existential for Israel. This is, in a way, it's existential for the Palestinian people, who suffer more and more and will suffer more and more until their leadership actually allow them to live a proper, decent life of friendship and cooperation with Israel. And those people who are the BDS movement and the other people who are throwing this muck around about Israel are simply encouraging terrorist leaders.
It's funny, you and I are having this conversation. It's so clear. It's clear as day to me. But unfortunately, this propaganda machine is very successful. Look, so my hat's off to them, because what they have done is successfully convinced not just the youth, adults, the media outlets, major media outlets, universities. It's Al Jazeera, which is owned by Qatar. Millions of dollars coming out of Qatar into United States, into England. I recently learned, I didn't know this, that Qatar owns about 30% of Heathrow Airport. I'm sitting in New York right now. I heard that they own a certain percentage of the Empire State Building. No, we must ask why. This is a completely different, but this is it's a very successful propaganda warfare. And I just want to say it personally, it is so alarming to me. It's so disappointing that I see the Jewish people struggling. And I want to bring it back. I want to ask you, from your perspective as a non-Jewish person, and I'm putting you on the spot. I realize it's a difficult conversation. What is it that you think that we should be doing more of and we're not doing right? I'd like to understand, because you're a true friend to the Jewish people. So I'd love to hear your perspective. Should we be out there having an Al Jazeera, propaganda pumping millions into universities? What should we be doing?
Yeah, I think the first thing I'd say is that it's a very, very tough fight. We shouldn't underestimate how tough it is, because the other side has gained so much traction in a propaganda campaign that has been going on certainly since the late 50s, early 60s, probably even before that, in its current form. And you mentioned before that I'd written an article about the origins of the current anti-Israel campaign in Moscow. And that's where it began. It began in the Soviet Union. It began with Stalin, who wanted to turn what was basically a religious conflict of Muslims refusing to accept that Jews could be not only present in the land of Israel, but that they could be the government of it. Because under their religious doctrine, if any territory has once been controlled by Islam, it can never be controlled by anybody else. And of course, at one point, the land of Israel was under the control of the Ottoman Empire, and so that's the basis of the conflict. It's a religious conflict. It's where Muslims do not accept Jews' right to live and exist in that country, and that was turned by Moscow and Egypt working together, but the KGB in particular. It was turned into a war of national liberation in the 60s. That was Moscow did this in many different countries around the world, created wars of national liberation, and they created the Palestinian people. There was no such thing as a Palestinian people before Moscow invented it. There were obviously Arabs living there, but they weren't called the original Palestinians were Jews.
Absolutely.
So they invented this identity for them, and they invented a narrative by which the Jews had just moved in from Europe and taken over their land, taken over their territory, stole their property from them. And this was a small, desperate people struggling to fight back against it. And this was a narrative, which is a false narrative. It was then, it is today, that was created by Moscow. So I think.
And why? Why do you think Moscow did this? Why did the KGB do this? What are your thoughts?
The reason they did it was because when Israel was first re-established in 1948, the Russians, or the Soviets, wanted Israel to be aligned with them. They wanted Israel on their side against the US and the UK, which was at that time was very dominant in the Middle East. Mm-hmm. And they expected that, and there was a good reason to expect it, because Israel in its early iterations was pretty much a left-wing country, a Labour-dominated socialist country, and therefore the Soviet Union naturally expected them to align with them. Well, Ben-Gurion in around the late 60s or early to mid 60s made a decision. He at one time he wanted to be basically aligned with both. He wanted to take neither side, but he recognized that the only sensible way ahead was to align with the US, and he did. And I don't think the Soviets particularly wanted to destroy Israel, but they just wanted to turn Israel from being a country aligned with the US to being aligned with the Soviet Union. And that's the reason behind their campaign, which university students today chanting "From the river to the sea," talking about the apartheid state. These are all slogans that come from
the Soviet Union. Absolutely. It's unbelievable how much we have inherited from the propaganda machine. And the interesting thing that I just, knowing the Soviet history, when the Soviet Union collapsed in 91, that entire propaganda, that slur campaign collapsed with it because it was so shaky. It was built on lies. But where is it? But it was shipped so successfully to the Arab world, to the United Nations, to Durban, South Africa, and we have it right now. So we are inheriting, in many ways, the remnants of the Cold War, because it's really a proxy war between the West or US and Soviets. And so many people don't know this. But let's I want to also, because I know our time is limited, I want to talk to you about the normalization with the Arab world and Israel. Are you hopeful? How true is this? How lasting is this? I mean, I understand history is still unfolding. We haven't read the history on this, but what are your predictions?
I'm very, very optimistic, and Israel and three Arab countries together signed the Abraham Accords a few years back, and that was vehemently resisted by the Palestinian leadership. They spoke out really, really strongly about it. And why was that? Obviously, one thing they don't want is to be isolated in the Arab world. They need the support of the Arab world. And they felt this would isolate them. But the other reason was that they've been telling their people for decades that you can't work with Israelis, they're monkeys and pigs, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. You can't deal with them. And the people have believed it. And then suddenly the people saw that three other Arab countries were dealing with them openly. And I was in Dubai not so long ago, and I was driving down the main highway through Dubai, and on both sides of the road were these huge great placards saying "Visit Tel Aviv." So it's and I went to a kosher restaurant in an iconic building, not up some back street in Dubai, an iconic building in Dubai, very fashionable building, a big kosher restaurant, absolutely packed full, and not with Jews alone. So and they see this, they can see this going on, the Palestinian people, and they think, well, if our Arab brothers can deal with them, why can't we deal with them? That terrified Abbas and the other leaders of the Palestinians, and then I think that's been a great success, and it's obviously there's a lot more work to do, and it's got to be developed further and further. But the current normalization activity is focused on Saudi Arabia. Now, those three countries that signed up to the Abraham Accords would certainly not have done so without Saudi Arabia's approval. So behind the scenes, Saudi Arabia gave them the green light to do that. And Saudi Arabia want now to normalize relations with Israel. I know that. I was in the capital, I forgot the name of it now, Riyadh. I was in Riyadh a few years ago, and I had meetings with government officials there who told me that they were going to normalize with Israel. They explained some of the problems that stood in the way, but they were absolutely clear about that. And I also understood very clearly that the Palestinian issue was not going to be a big problem. Now, that's often kind of put forward by many commentators as being the thing that will stop it, unless Israel grants an independent state to the Palestinians, then normalization will not go ahead. That's not the way the Saudis are thinking. Absolutely is not the way the Saudis are thinking. As a matter of fact,
you do not think that the Saudis are going to push Israel to do some sort of move that would placate the Palestinian Authority?
I think the Saudis will probably, and these talks are going on right now as we speak. I think the Saudis will probably ask Israel to make some kind of concessions, but they're going to be minor concessions, like statements of intent, perhaps a repudiation of the idea of Israel annexing Judea and Samaria. These sort of moves, which I think are palatable to Israel, in my view. Not obviously all Israelis; some would resist it strongly, but I think the government would probably be able to get away with that. But I think one of the biggest problems is the Biden administration. Now, Biden has been kind of standing on his soapbox, talking about
Let's talk about that. Mm-hmm.
Well, he's been talking about how he's going to try and bring about normalization. But I think behind the scenes, they are trying to press the Saudis into extracting far greater concessions from the Israelis than the Saudis want. I think that's what's happening.
Why? Why?
Why? Because, well, there's a couple of reasons. There's three main reasons why this is going on. One, of course, one reason why Biden wants a deal between Saudi, a kind of deal between Saudi, the US, and Israel, is because he wants to have some kind of foreign affairs legacy. He's screwed up every aspect of foreign affairs since he's been president. The war in Ukraine that's going on now is, in my opinion, directly, Putin invaded Ukraine exactly because, about 6 months later, because Biden pulled out of Afghanistan in such a humiliating way, and Putin saw the weakness of the United States. So that was one of Biden's foreign policy fiascos. Another one is the allowing China, the kind of Western world's arch enemy, China, to broker a deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which was a real, real undermining of US. Yeah, and so that's the second reason. And the third reason, on top of this kind of legacy of a foreign policy hit, is he wants to be the man who brought peace between Israel and the Palestinians. And so, he thinks, because he knows how much Saudi want this deal, and the deal involves what they really want out of it, apart from cooperation with Israel, which is already happening anyway. What they really want is certain US guarantees on nuclear energy, on defense, and on provision of high-tech military equipment. That's what they want. The Saudis want that out of it. So Biden sees that as leverage to be able to persuade Israel that in order to normalize with Saudi, which is so important for Israel, then they must go along with a two-state solution. It's not going to happen. There's no way it's going to happen, but that's what's behind his thinking.
And from the Saudi perspective, why do you think they want to align with Israel? From Israel's perspective, I think it's going to be a huge win and so important. Why do you think from the Saudis they want to align with America and Israel?
Well, they're terrified of Iran, even though they've got this Chinese brokered deal or not deal, but normalization with Iran, which their diplomatic relations have broken down for a long time. But they're terrified of Iran. Iran is embarked on a nuclear program, which is progressing on very, very fast, and would be even faster if it wasn't for Israel's military action and black ops within Iran that we all know about, that have been going on for a long time. That's really put a brake on. It's not stopped it, but it's put a bit of a brake on.
And in your mind, I know we can't play fortune tellers here, but if Iran did have, God forbid, a nuke, do you think they would use it?
I think we have to assume they would. I think my assumption. We've heard Putin banging on endlessly since he invaded Ukraine about the nuclear weapon. He's threatened the West with nuclear attack numerous times. Now, I don't believe for one moment he will use it, because although he's done some very nasty things, and he's not a nice man, either to his own people or to other countries in the world, he's not insane. He's not irrational. He's a rational thinker. He knows that if he attacks either Ukraine or the West with nuclear weapons, then Russia will be seriously damaged, well beyond anything that has happened so far. Now, and that was also the case during the Cold War. I think it was pretty clear that nuclear weapons weren't going to be used then. But Iran is a different issue. I believe that Iran, we must assume it. We can't foresee the future. We have to assume it. You can't assume it won't happen. I think Iran would be willing to bombard Israel with nuclear weapons if it had them, and if they could get through, knowing that millions of Iranians are likely to die in the retaliation attacks, either from the US or Israel. But that doesn't matter. That the mentality of the Iranian leadership is that for what is right, which is the destruction of Israel, it doesn't matter how much their people suffer. So I couldn't stand up and say confidently they will use it if they get it, but I think we have to make that assumption, and therefore they simply cannot be allowed to become a nuclear armed country. And that's it's obviously a big fear for Israel. It's also a very, very big fear for Saudi Arabia, which is why they are so keen and have been cooperating with Israel for a number of years now.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. in the final question, which is a little bit difficult, but I love asking difficult questions. When I met you a few years ago, you reminded me of Émile Zola. Now, for our listeners and viewers, Émile Zola was a French writer of the 19th century, and he witnessed, as a journalist, he was covering the Dreyfus affair. And in 1898, he penned a letter, J'accuse, which translates to I accuse. And he accused the French government of basically anti-Semitism. This letter has become canonical for Jewish history because it's the consciousness of humanity. It's the consciousness of humanity pointing a finger and saying, anti-Semitism is a disease. Anti-Semitism, the hatred of the Jew, is just, it's as they say, canary. The Jew is the canary in the coal mine. And so this is my question for you as we conclude. If you were to pen such a letter today, J'accuse, who would you accuse in fomenting anti-Semitism? The oldest.
Well, I'd certainly accuse the French government of it, as Zola did. But that's obviously slightly tongue-in-cheek. But I think I would accuse various governments around the world of anti-Semitism, including the British government and the American government. And I don't say that they're. I mean, when I say anti-Semitism, I think one thing that I'm very clear about is that being anti-Zionist or anti-Israel is a form of anti-Semitism. It is anti-Semitism. So those countries, those governments that work against Israel and that side with Israel's enemies, and I think Britain and the US are both two of Israel's closest possible friends, but they are in some ways anti-Semitic because they do side with Israel's enemies on many things. I think it's becoming less so over here in the UK than it was maybe a few years ago, but it's still the case. So I would accuse them. But I would also, I think probably I would certainly accuse a lot of university professors of being anti-Semitic in their BDS campaigns and their not just allowing, but also leading students against Israel and against the supporters of Israel and against the Jews. And I think one thing in the universities that we should understand that maybe people don't fully understand is that the BDS movement and the other anti-Israel movements, they have no expectation that they will destroy Israel. They know they won't. The BDS movement so far has had zero impact on Israel's economy, zero impact, despite the years it's been going on, the efforts been going into it. So they know they're not going to do that. Their target, the target of most of these groups, are Jews in America, in Britain, in Germany, in France, wherever else. That's their target. And why is that their target? If that's not anti-Semitic, I don't know what it is. But why is that their target? It's their target because they know that the greatest supporters of Israel in every country around the world are going to be Jews. It's a simple fact. It's obvious. And they want to undermine that support. They want to stop Jewish students on university campuses, Jewish professors as well, from sticking up for Israel and sticking up against their BDS campaigns. That's what they want to do. And so they put students in a position where not only will they not stand up for Israel in some cases, there's some brave students who do, and I've met many of them, and I admire them immensely. But some of them won't just not stand up for Israel. Increasingly, they're attacking Israel. Jewish students are attacking Israel on the most specious grounds that you can imagine, being handed the lines to attack Israel by these different movements. And on campuses where there are Jewish anti-Israel chapters which exist on numerous campuses, that's where the greatest number of anti-Semitic attacks occur of any university by a very large number. So I think I would put them at the top of the list, and also I would have a go at the media. Before I know this was probably our final question, but I do want to say one other thing that I think is quite important. And you asked me a question earlier, which I didn't really answer, which was what can the Jews do what can we do differently? Well, I don't want to go into tactics and details. Obviously, everyone has their own themes and their own campaigns and their own circumstances. So, and it's really for everyone to do what they can. But what I would say, and I say this to Jewish students, whether they're in high schools or universities or whatever, and I think it's important for people to recognize that it is not to stand up for Israel and to fight against this horrific anti-Israel slur campaign. It's not a burden. This shouldn't. None of us who are involved in this should see it as a burden. Instead, we should see it as an honor. It is an honor to stand up and fight for the state of Israel. We know what Israel's like. We know they deserve to be stood up for and defended, and we should see it as an honor. In the same way as previous generations saw it as an honor to stand up and fight for Israel in battle in the Yom Kippur War, which I think began in 1973 today, or the next day or so. And these people, you know, they of course they fought for their country, and they you know, many of them were killed and wounded, but for them it was also an honor to do so. And generations of Jews going right the way back, thousands and thousands of years back, have seen it as an honor to fight for their people. And I think our students today in the US, UK, anywhere else, they should, when they consider whether to take up arms or not, and by arms I mean take up the narrative, the counter narrative, I think they should see it as being not just defending Israel, but defending the Jewish people, because the Jewish people are accused of despicable things as part of the anti-Israel campaign. And you know, these young people, as I say, I have huge admiration for them. They take, those of them who do stand up, they do take risks with their future, with their present life, etc. But what they're doing, they're not just countering any sort of random narrative that they think's wrong. They're actually sticking up for their own family, for their own sisters, brothers, mothers, and in future for their kids. And therefore, like I said, they should take it as not a burden, not something we have to go and do. It's a real nightmare, but they should say, you know, at this time, at this place, when I was needed, I was there and I stood up and fought for Israel.
And that is exactly why there's no one like you. I'm very serious. I couldn't have said it better. I wanted to say it. I was a student once. I fought anti-Semitism that looked like anti-Israel. It was never a burden, because what I was doing was standing up for myself as a Jew, for my people, for my history, for my mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers. And so, again, I'm so grateful for your time. I know you're a very busy man. I have so many more questions, but we are going to come to an end. And so I just want to say that for Jewish TV Channel and BIPACT News, I'm Naya Lekht. Stay tuned as Jewish TV Channel and BIPACT News invite more courageous warriors and thought leaders for the Jewish people, for the land of Israel and the Western world. Thank you so much for your time, Colonel Kemp, and
thank you. It's a great pleasure, Naya. Look forward to seeing you again soon.